Hello everyone, I'm Jack Fisher and welcome to my world. And I was among the many fans who were excited and intrigued about the introduction of the Absolute Universe by DC Comics. It promised to do for DC what the Ultimate Universe did for Marvel, offering bold new takes on familiar characters and building an entirely new world from the ground up. But this wasn't another Crisis-style revamp. This wasn't another reboot in the mold of the New 52. This universe was actually the byproduct of the events of Absolute Power. And while I would highly recommend any and all comic fans to check out that story, you actually don't need to know anything about it to appreciate the Absolute Universe. The only detail that matters is that this is a new world with a very different history, and it's a far darker history than that of the mainline DC universe. That extends to the characters as well, and for someone like Batman, a character whose history is already pretty damn dark, reimagining him presents a hell of a challenge. Throughout his history, there have been plenty of different takes on Batman, and most do tend to go overboard with the grim and gritty overtones. But those versions of Batman are largely gimmicks resigned to Elseworlds. Absolute Batman promises a new vision from the ground up. It's certainly a bold undertaking on every level, but Scott Snyder, one of DC's most accomplished writers, really went the extra mile with this series. And ever since Absolute Batman #1 was released, it has garnered plenty of praise, as well as unprecedented sales. I was among those who made sure to pre-order this comic as soon as possible, and I had high hopes and even higher expectations. After reading the first issue and taking some time to process it, I can safely say that Snyder delivered. This might very well be the best single Batman comic of the past 25 years. But I'm not making this video to simply review the comic and praise it for everything it does right. Numerous reviewers and YouTubers have already done that and done it well. Instead, I'd like to take a step back and explore why Absolute Batman works as well as it does. I also want to make the case that this is the Batman we need right now. This is a Batman who better fits the current cultural zeitgeist. And his impact extends beyond the medium of comics. Because this is not just another novel take on a familiar character. Absolute Batman, and the Absolute Universe in general, challenges our very notion of the superhero narrative, but in a good way. It actually dares to ask how anyone can even be heroes in a world with a less than ideal foundation. For Absolute Batman, that means a world in which he's not born into immense wealth and privilege, doesn't have an arsenal of resources that only a billionaire could afford. He doesn't have a mansion with a secret cave complex underneath. He doesn't even have a loyal butler who takes care of him. But he's still Bruce Wayne. He's still a man who suffered an incredible trauma as a child. And yet still, he channels that trauma into becoming Batman. He just has to go about it in a very different way. And Absolute Batman #1 makes clear that this way is a lot harder, but also a lot more compelling. Even without all the guidance and resources we're used to seeing with Batman, he still proves to be very capable in his never-ending crusade against crime. I would even make the case that the Batman in the Absolute Universe is the most imposing version of Batman we've ever seen. The structure of the first issue is quite remarkable in how it shows us who this new Batman is and how he came to be. Alfred Pennyworth acts as our main POV character, but he has no connection whatsoever to the Wayne family. Instead of being a dutiful butler, he's a grizzled mercenary on a mission on behalf of a mysterious benefactor. That mission initially has nothing to do with Batman, but their targets are similar. A new gang of merciless thugs known as the Party Animals have set up shop in Gotham. They're causing all sorts of death, destruction, and chaos. And Alfred is expected to deal with it, as any skilled mercenary would. But through his reconnaissance skills, we get a thorough perspective on who Bruce Wayne is in this world, how he became Batman, and why he's driven to do what he does. The catalyst is fairly similar to most every other Batman mythos. As a child, Bruce Wayne witnessed the death of a loved one at the hands of a criminal. It usually happens in a dark alley outside a movie theater, but this time, it happens at a public zoo in broad daylight. And the only one killed is Bruce's father, Thomas Wayne. It's a fairly striking difference to the Batman mythos, but it still works. Because the location, the era, and the circumstances of this catalyst aren't really important in the grand scheme of things. What matters is that this incident traumatizes young Bruce, and it's a painful trauma that he carries with him well into adulthood. But ultimately, he channels that trauma into becoming Batman. That doesn't just mean putting on a costume and fighting criminals. It means becoming a symbol to those who've endured a similar trauma, as well as an embodiment of fear to those who might prey on the vulnerable. These are the elements of Batman at his most fundamental, and Absolute Batman covers every single one of them. But beyond the basics, the path Bruce Wayne takes to becoming Gotham's Dark Knight does plenty to set him apart. He's certainly no billionaire playboy, but he is very much a child of Gotham. His father is a teacher, and his mother is a social worker. These occupations put the Wayne family squarely in the lower middle class. And growing up in Crime Alley, which is still a rough neighborhood in this world, Bruce and his parents are never far from crime and poverty. This setup, more than anything else, grounds Bruce Wayne in a way we rarely get with Batman. Yes, there have been numerous stories and plots that involve Bruce losing all his money, but Absolute Batman takes a more streamlined approach. The Wayne family isn't rich, but they're not broke either. They didn't lose their family fortune, and near as we can tell, they never had one to begin with. Instead, the Waynes are just ordinary people living in a city full of problems. But rather than run from those problems, they do what they can to navigate them. And with a job like teacher and social worker, they're actually in a position to do plenty of good. This already primes young Bruce to have a strong moral center, long before he endures any loss or trauma. He sees his parents doing good in a city that doesn't foster much good in the first place, and it provides a solid foundation and a host of positive influences. In addition, it's much more relatable than being born into a wealthy family. And I believe that is a very relevant detail for Absolute Batman. In decades past, we could envision this idealistic scenario where someone with so much money and resources uses it to do heroic deeds. But in more recent times, the idea of rich people doing anything of the sort, that's almost too unbelievable, even for a superhero comic. Now, I don't want to get too deep into the politics behind that sentiment, but in terms of trends and social attitudes, people are just much more aware of how immense wealth rarely inspires heroism. Because of that, I think Absolute Batman needed Bruce Wayne to be poor or at least of modest means. Otherwise, he would be subject to the same criticisms as many other versions. It usually boils down to this. If he's a billionaire, why be a masked vigilante? Why not channel those billions into anti-crime, anti-poverty programs? It's often a running joke in the Batman mythos, but it's also not an unreasonable criticism. But Absolute Batman avoids it altogether, while also confronting it in a novel way at the end, which I'll opt not to spoil. But not being a billionaire doesn't mean Bruce Wayne has no inherent advantages. He is still naturally gifted with a genius-level intellect. Even before he becomes Batman, he demonstrates that he's capable of using that intellect to build amazing things. He's also born with a number of above-average physical traits. He stands at 6.5 feet tall according to a mugshot. He also has a muscular build that would make Olympic athletes jealous. He even has a promising future as a star athlete at one point. This almost makes it seem like Bruce Wayne won a genetic lottery. But Absolute Batman goes out of its way to show how much work he actually puts into himself. He works out relentlessly at the gym, pushing his body to the utmost limit and beyond. He also pushes his mind just as much, studying, researching, and gaining the knowledge he would eventually need to become Batman. That was his goal the moment his father was slain. It may seem trivial given how many times Batman's story has played out in other iterations. But with Absolute Batman, there's a clearer sense of how much work he put into it, as well as all the obstacles he had to navigate along the way. The end result is a Batman who trains and earns the title of Gotham's Dark Knight. And the way he carries himself when he's in costume, that, I believe, is where Absolute Batman reaffirms why Batman still matters. Once we get a glimpse of how he operates, taking down an entire gang of party animals, showing off his fighting skills as well as his engineering skills with a battle axe, we see a Batman who needs to be more brutal than most. He still makes it a point not to kill, going out of his way to avoid fatal wounds, even against ruthless gang members. But he leaves his mark on everyone he faces. Some of those marks just happen to be bloodier than most. It certainly fits the aesthetic of the Absolute Universe. This world is supposed to be darker and harsher than most other DC universes. But even if that means Batman has to be a lot rougher with his enemies, there are still lines that he won't cross. And having to walk those lines promises to be much more difficult. But he still doesn't shy away from that challenge. That's a huge part of what makes him Batman in any universe. He will not become a killer like the one who murdered his father, but he will cut some ruthless thug's hand off to send a message. The criminals of Gotham had nothing to fear before he showed up. But now they do. And if they think the worst they'll endure is a stint in prison, they are sorely mistaken. This added brutality doesn't feel like an effort to make Batman darker and edgier for modern audiences. It actually feels necessary for this new absolute universe. For Bruce Wayne to be an effective Batman, he has to be bolder with his tactics. And since he lacks immense wealth and resources, he also has to be a lot more direct. At the same time, he still can't escape his very human limitations. In his many versions, Batman has proven to be incredibly capable, sometimes to the point of absurdity. But at the end of the day, he's still human. He still has vulnerabilities, both physical and mental. Some are even touched on in the first issue of Absolute Batman. I would even make the case that this version of Batman is more vulnerable than most, despite how capable he proves himself to be. But that does not stop him from pursuing his crusade. And given the sentiments of the citizens of Gotham, it's a very necessary crusade. The government cannot deal with the extent of Gotham's crime problem. The Gotham police are overwhelmed and overpowered. The city needs Batman almost as much as Bruce Wayne needs to be Batman. Put all this together, the characters, the circumstances, the nature of the new absolute universe, and you don't just get a Batman that fits into this world perfectly. You get a Batman who feels like a natural culmination of sorts. This is the Batman that the absolute universe needs. This is also the Batman that the entire superhero narrative needs right now. Take away his money, his cave, his mansion, his butler, and all the resources he might need to wage a one-man crusade. But Bruce Wayne will still find a way to be the hero his city and his people need. That's why he's absolutely and unequivocally the goddamn Batman. Thanks for watching, everyone, and thanks for joining me in my world. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and until next time, take care and stay safe.